Morning. I'm really glad I got to speak after Vikas and Ryan because, I want to just echo kind of what's been said before. I am a little troubled to learn that Canada is base camp. Where does that leave us in the U.S.? I'm reminded, I went out to dinner with a friend from Haiti last week. His name is Franz Varela, and Franz is the person who is the chief engineer for Haiti and has been ever since they ended the dictatorship. And so he's the one who keeps the water running and the electricity on. Without him, things would really be even worse in Haiti. And he said that he just got back from a tour of India, and they went to look at poverty in India. And he was with his wife, and they said, actually, India looked good. I mean, what people called, poverty in India was actually a step above, several steps above where things are in Haiti. And in fact, I know a Haitian graduate student whose master's thesis was titled From Misery to Poverty. Poverty is an aspiration for Haiti. And so anyway, I'm reminded of that listening to Ryan. Like, base camp is an aspiration for us here in America. I wish we had the problem of, we have universal access, and now we're going to take it to a higher level. But anyway, it's good to know that there are people, who have worked their way out of the dark ages right nearby. Several people asked me today, yesterday and today, why are you here? And I actually met with a deputy mayor in New York, the new deputy mayor for Health and Human Services. And the first thing she asked me, why do you care about health? Because she sees my title, you're an urban planning professor at M.I.T. Why do you care about health? And, I was a little taken aback by the question, actually. I've been thinking about it a little bit. And, when I met with the deputy mayor, I kind of gave her, well, I'm an urban planner, and urban planning deals with a lot of the conditions that Ryan was talking about, and blah, 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 blah. But that's not really why I'm here. That's the professional, blah, 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 blah kind of answer you give, because everyone has to check your credentials. It's like a credential check, At one point, I used to say, I'm going to get a T-shirt with my resume on it, so when people see this black guy walking into these kind of meetings, everybody says, where did you go to college? What do you do? I'm just going to wear a shirt. It's going to have my resume right on it. So no one. That's not why I'm here. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because my dad, who was a Baptist minister, had a big church. In those days, that didn't pay the bills. He also had a full-time job at the Pennsylvania Railroad Station. He also was very active in the civil rights movement, and he never slept. And he died at age 39 from malignant hypertension because he never rested. He never slept. And I know so many others of his generation that were so dedicated, that worked so hard, they didn't take care of themselves, and they died young. I'm here because in my dad's church, every Sunday after church, we would organize people to visit the sick. And he would go to pray with the sick, and this is before Medicare. And I remember going to visit Deacon Vaughn, who had gangrene and who kept a razor blade next to his bedside, and every time we went there, he'd cut off some flesh that had died away on his leg, and I remember the smell. I remember the suffering. I remember watching so many people suffer. When my dad died, my uncle, his brother, became a second father to me, and he was murdered when I was 14 in his business establishment on opening night in North Philadelphia by a kid who didn't know him, who stabbed him in the heart just out of random frustration when my uncle said to him, do you have ID? Because it was opening night at a restaurant bar, and he knew the liquor control board would be there, and then his bouncer was late, and he had to check. And the kid said, here's my ID, and stabbed him in the heart. And I read Malcolm X soon after that. This was in 1970. And Malcolm X said, this is what stuck with me in his autobiography. He said, you know, you can arrest a kid like that. You can kill a kid like that. There's another one across the street. They're going to do the same thing tomorrow. At some point, we have to ask the question, the 18-year-old who killed my uncle was his second murder. He had another one when he was 15. He didn't really care if he lived or died. Actually, at some point you have to ask the question, what kind of society do we have that raises 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds who's already given up on life? What kind of society is that? And until we ask that question, we will not change it. My mother, when I was 9, was diagnosed with, they didn't really know what she had. They said it was a stroke. It turned out it wasn't a stroke. They said it was polyarteritis, but no one really knew exactly what that was. They told me she would live for 2 years. She died 2 years ago. She died 2 years ago, and her faith carried her through. When doctors said she was going to die, her faith carried her through. So I learned something about the limits of what medicine, doctors who sometimes act like they know all, I learned that there's some limits to that as well. So why am I here? I'm here because I'm a human being. I care about human suffering. It's my whole life. I find it strange when people ask me, why do I care? Why am I involved in the healthcare movement? I don't need a credential to be in the conversation. I was asked, no, it's not for applause. I mean, it's not for applause. I mean, I just find the question itself is wrong. I have been involved in Brooklyn and the Bronx in organizing community labor coalitions to improve community health for the last couple of years. And I'm going to talk about that and our approach to it. And I was initially asked to come in by the Nurses Union, NISNA, State of New York, Hospital Workers Union, 1199, to do a community health needs study in central Brooklyn to answer the governor who was poised to close Interfaith Medical Center, which would have made the 20th safety net hospital closed in New York State in recent years. And the community and the workers were just saying, is this right? I mean, is closing a hospital because it's losing money? I mean, is that right? What do we say back to the governor? What do we really need here? So I was asked to come in and do a study, and I brought in some colleagues, and we did. And we made some recommendations for changing the hospital. We identified severe, extreme needs in the community, most of which are things that Ryan was talking about. It's the sickest community in all of New York State. Its health outcomes are not as good as Bangladesh. It's on the level of Iraq and El Salvador in terms of health outcomes in these neighborhoods in central Brooklyn. So we came out with some recommendations for the hospital, but the big recommendation was we have to change the community. We have to change the place. We have to change people's lives. And so we set upon, like, how do you do that? How do you organize around that? That's what I want to talk about. So, as I said, my dad was a minister. I had the blessing of growing up in a family and in a network of churches that was very involved in the civil rights movement from the very beginning. And one of the things that I saw as a child, week in, week out, and that was really ingrained to me, was the stuff you never hear about. When you look at those, documentaries on the civil rights movement, you see the protests and the marches and this and that. But what you don't see are the years of deep emotional, spiritual, psychological consciousness work that went on in these churches before people had the willingness or confidence to stand up and fight. I mean, you may have heard the slogan, "I am somebody," from the civil rights movement. Why do you need to say that? It was because when the civil rights movement started, black people in churches actually didn't think they were entitled to rights. They actually believed they were inferior. They actually didn't have the confidence to go up and vote at a voting booth when their employer might be standing nearby. They didn't think they were worthy to speak back when somebody white said something to them they didn't like. They bowed their head. And a lot of the religion that was preached in the church was, God doesn't make ugly people. There's nothing wrong with your lips. There's nothing wrong with your nose. There's nothing wrong with your skin color. There's nothing wrong with your hair. I don't care what Vogue magazine says. God doesn't make ugly people. God only makes good. And you're going to have to decide, this is what was going on in the churches. You're going to have to decide if you really believe in this God you worship every week, or if you believe in this government that tells you you're second class or you're something else. You're going to have to make that decision. We want you to be with this God who created all of us. We're all on earth for a short period of time, and God made it for us to be with one another. You're going to have to decide where you stand on that. Week in, week out, week in, week out. And after a while, people began to really internalize that message, and then when they looked at all the magazines, with all the white faces, when they looked at all the negative stereotypes of the black faces, they were able to say, well, that's not truth. That's not what beauty really is. They were able to change. Little by little. And then when I started seeing people stand up in church with this new consciousness, that was the movement. And when that change happened, it was over. Everything else is etc. The protests, the marches, etc. The law changes, etc. People thought, well, this structure, segregation, oh my God, is so firm, it's so huge, it's so rigid. Hundreds of years, we can never change it. It fell down. I remember the day it fell down. I remember getting on the Amtrak train desegregated the very first time. People said it would never happen. It fell down. It started with that week in, week out, building that internal strength of the people. When Jesus said, and this is from Howard Thurman, a black theologian who was Martin Luther King's mentor. When Jesus said, turn the other cheek, he didn't mean bow down in the face of oppression. It's not what he meant. What he meant was, your oppressor is always going to slap you. There's always going to be an attack. One attack, another attack, 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 attack. If all you do is react to attacks, you will never step back and think for yourself. You'll never have the peace of mind or the composure to actually strategize for yourself. So Jesus was saying, don't just react to being slapped. Have the internal fortitude to step back and think for yourself and strategize for yourself, because no one is going to chart your path to freedom for you. You're going to have to do that for yourself. And that means being able to withstand these blows and at the same time being able to sit back, stand back, and have the courage, the fortitude, the confidence to plot your own way forward. That's what Jesus meant. That's what they taught in the church. And when the people got that, the rest was et cetera, et cetera. So I would characterize what we're trying to do in Brooklyn as similar. When it comes to what is making people sick in communities, the true experts are the certified nursing assistants, the home care workers, the nurses who live in the community. Those are the real leaders. I know in Central Brooklyn, I don't know about every place, but I know in Central Brooklyn, the doctors don't live in the community. They drive in, park in a guarded parking lot, go in the hospital, the clinic, get back in their car, and drive out to some suburb. They don't have any idea what's going on in the community whatsoever. When it comes to changing and improving community health, the real experts are these workers who live in the community and also work in these hospitals and work in these clinics. They have a foot in both worlds. They actually know what's going on in these communities. So we say to these workers, you are the leaders. You are the leaders. In this struggle to change the social determinants of health, you are the knowledge leaders. We're going to learn from you. If you don't change it, nobody else is going to change it. And right now, when a doctor walks in the room, when a hospital administrator walks in the room, literally, these CNAs, they shrink. They literally shrink in their chair when these folks walk into the room. And so that's the first thing we're trying to change. Because if we don't change that, forget about building a movement. There is no movement. If when a doctor walks in the room, everyone shrinks. No. It's the same thing we talked about in that church. It's the same thing. So I would characterize us doing three things. One, we're constructing our own narrative about what wellness means. Our own narrative. In central Brooklyn, 90% of the people are black, but they're from the Caribbean, they're from the American South, they're from Honduras, they're from a lot of places. But they all come out of slavery at some point. And there's a tradition in the community which is called liberation. The struggle is for liberation. And by liberation, they mean liberation of the human spirit. So what we're really trying to do in our narrative is liberate the human spirit. By liberating the human spirit, I mean capitalism didn't make people enslave Africans. Capitalism didn't make people do that. Capitalism didn't make people commit genocide against indigenous people in the Americas or commit genocide against Jews in Europe. Capitalism didn't force people to do that. There are a lot of ways to make money. There are a lot of ways to make money. These things were not mandated by capitalism. There's a deeper problem we have, even deeper than capitalism, that has to do with the human spirit. That's what we're talking about. And the same can be said of our health system. There's a deeper problem than just there isn't enough primary care clinics, there aren't enough this, there aren't enough that. There's a problem of the human spirit when we can sit and look at people suffer and it doesn't cause us suffering. That's a problem of the human spirit. So our goal doesn't start from technology or science. How do we fix this or that? Of course, we have to pay attention to those things, but that's not our starting point. Our starting point isn't materialism. We need more of this good. We need more of that good. We want to create a world in which human beings value each other and our relationships with one another more than we value anything else. And that is what we call liberating the human spirit. That is also what underlies the Black Lives Matter movement, which started in the same community, that we're working in. It is what Martin Luther King was fighting for. And that's it. Now, I do a lot of work with the labor movement, and if you ever went to the national headquarters of the AFL-CIO in Washington, D.C., they have murals, and murals of the labor movement. And, beautiful murals. I love them, right? But one, they start with, like, the early, 1912 Lawrence textile workers strike and beautiful mural, and takes off from there. And I always ask them, I say, where's Harriet Tubman's picture? Where's Harriet Tubman's picture? Does everybody know who Harriet Tubman was? Yeah, Harriet Tubman, she was an amazing leader, right? A woman, going back and forth under conditions of like fascism, which is slavery, where they'd kill you just as soon as look at you. And she's going back and forth, leading people to freedom. A woman in the 1850s doing that, right? Where's her picture? And if the fight against slavery isn't a labor struggle, then please tell me what labor is. Tell me what your movement is. And I say to the AFL-CIO, if you can't embrace this black woman as part of your history, if you can't take pride and feel great about being connected to somebody like a Harriet Tubman, then you can't build a movement of working people in America these days for the future. Maybe that's why you're at 7% density in America. and can't seem to grow. Because until women of color become leaders in your movement and in your history and your consciousness, we can't build a movement. So those are the kind of bridges we have to cross. Now, when we built the table in Brooklyn, we asked our labor partners, don't come to the table with a narrow agenda, I'm just looking out for my members. Don't come like that. We say to community groups, don't come to the table just saying, how can I get more money for my community organization? Don't come like that. And we say to politicians, don't even think you're going to come here just try and milk us for votes. Don't come like that. Don't come like that. We've said we all have to unite around a bigger goal. A bigger goal. That goal is liberation of the spirit, changing the world, changing our communities. And if we're united in that, then we're in a much stronger position to aid and address everyone's individual needs. So that's been the mantra. And it has really created a different kind of dynamic, I think, in our coalition. It's been meeting once a week for 2 years. You know, we have like all the churches, we have, you know, the labor groups community, and it seems people believe in this. Second thing we're doing is we're saying we need to move the policy discussion from ecosystem and ego thinking to ecosystem and eco thinking. And Ryan was speaking to this, but the way we train people and the way we organize programs creates silos. And so we're trying to get people out of the silos and break through, like health is a silo, housing is a silo, transportation is a silo, on and on. And then we have experts who stand guard over their various silos. And so we're trying to move beyond that because working in silos blinds us to what's happening in communities as a whole and from asking big questions and building the kind of broader, impactful movements that we need. Some of the big questions have already been asked by Vikas and Ryan, you know, but another one I'll put on the table is in the United States, the black household income ratio to the white household income ratio percentage in 1950 was 55.4%, something like that, 55%. So black households earns median 54% of what white households earn. Well, today it's 56%. So in between here in 1950, there was the civil rights movement, civil rights legislation. There are 9,000 black elected officials. Now, back then, blacks couldn't vote. There weren't hardly any, you know, few, handful. And household income disparities haven't changed at all. Why is that? What went wrong? What's wrong about that whole trajectory? The policies and everything else associated with how we deal with racial, something fundamental is wrong. And so that's another big question. We talk about the 1%, you know, that's a big question, you know, why we have this artificial world of scarcity and budget deficits when the world has never been wealthier. Yeah, that's a big question, need to have that on the table. Within America, in disparities, our civil rights legislation doesn't work. Electoral politics hasn't worked when it comes to really tackling these issues. We also believe that there are enough resources to solve all the problems we have in poor communities, but we also emphasize that most of these resources are within our reach if we organize and fight for them. I'll give a couple quick examples. Housing. People being forced out of housing in Brooklyn and in major cities where, you know, there's real estate speculation going on, money to be made is a huge thing. A majority of blacks, you know, 40 years ago lived in central cities. A majority now live in suburbs, places like Flint, where they can't even afford to like pay for infrastructure because of the income problems I talked about before. That's why we have Flints, but it's not just Flint. It's a national phenomena all across the country. However, we point out, you know, if you look in New York, almost all the big developers rely almost exclusively on labor pension funds to do their luxury development, including Donald Trump. So Stuyvesant Town was in the middle of Manhattan, 10,000 units, working class housing, you know, teachers, firefighters, hospital workers. Well, Stuyvesant Town was bought out a few years ago by Tishman Speyer for $5.2 billion. Tishman Speyer put up $29 million of their own capital, and the other 1.18 billion came from NYSERS, the New York City government workers. It came from the Ontario retirement system, public sector workers in Ontario, CalPERS, California teachers and firefighters, and the Anglican Church of England. That's where they got the $5.19 billion from those folks. And so these are labor pension funds that are being totally run, taken over, used by Wall Street to evict workers out of their house. Okay? That's within our reach. We can do something about that. The comptroller of New York City, Scott Stringer, is the sole decision maker on $127 billion of New York City pension fund money. The state comptroller has another $150 billion he manages for state workers, and I could talk about Ohio, California, many other places, same deal, okay? And working people, no one, you can go to any business school in America, nobody has a course that says, oh, if you're a labor leader, here's how not to get screwed by Wall Street, and here's how to direct your money in a different direction. Not a single course in America, at a business school. And guess what? They're not going to do the liberation playbook for us when it comes to our money. We're going to have to do that. They're not going to do that. So we talk about that, and we're working on getting some of that money redirected. Energy efficiency, 900,000 buildings in New York spend 40 to 50% more than they need to on energy. We can create programs to retrofit all those buildings for energy efficiency that will pay for themselves, usually within 3 to 5 years. And after that, just save more and more money every year. That is a job career ladder for an entire generation in New York. That's within our reach, and it pays for itself. We just have to fight and organize for it. Purchasing. Hospitals alone in New York buy tens of billions of dollars in goods and services every single year. Almost none of it made in New York. It could be, and everything from medical instruments down to some things we could do next week, like in our target area of Brownsville and East New York, a majority of residents live in public housing. Every single apartment in public housing has an oven. 23 hours a day, it's not on. They can all make bread. Hospitals serve lousy bread right now. We can have bread classes in the housing projects. Making 20, 30 bucks a day, making bread, and by the way, you don't need a Department of Health sign-off for bread because the process of making bread, you gotta heat it up, it kills the germs anyway. Anybody can make bread. That may not seem a lot to us, but 30 bucks a day coming in for a family in public housing right now is huge, right? There's a whole lot we can do with streams like that. I could keep going, but I won't. The last thing, I will mention, we're doing a project in the Bronx with a hospital. They gave us all their asthma data. Turns out, repeat asthma cases, turns out they're clustered in less than 50 buildings in a borough of 1.5 million people. So we're going in, organizing the residents in those buildings and saying, let's retrofit your building for asthma, and at the same time, let's do an energy retrofit. While the wall's torn up, let's do it together. The energy retrofit will pay for the asthma retrofit. It'll save the hospital a ton of money. So we're building those kinds of collaborations. And there are a zillion things we can do like that once we get out of silos. Last thing we're doing this summer is building a grassroots campaign with young people mainly, knocking on doors, and we're developing an inventory of who in Central Brooklyn is already working in anything health-related and who wants to work on anything health-related, and what do people think, why don't people exercise? Because the streets aren't safe. So which streets do people think are scary or dangerous? What are the hot spots? How do we build safe corridors? So people actually have somewhere to exercise. We're going to do a massive planning exercise this summer with all of these community folks we meet, and then we're going to come up with a plan for how do we improve community health together with them, and they are the leaders. They are the ones who are going to be the leaders in implementing this plan, not me, not any docs from the hospital. It's going to be them. So that's what we're doing. We're excited about it. We are also excited to meet all of you because we don't have any organized doctors groups in our meetings, our coalitions at all. And it's a missing voice in the whole conversation. So thank you very much.